There is a bird circling above the carcass in the field at the edge of your nearest nature reserve, or above the roadkill on the verge of the motorway, or above the dead sheep in the upland pasture that the farmer found this morning and has not yet dealt with. It is not a bird most people stop to look at. Its head is bare and slightly hunched into its shoulders. Its flight is effortless and unhurried in a way that reads, depending on your frame of mind, as either deeply graceful or faintly sinister, and its association in almost every cultural tradition it appears in is with death, with waiting, with the consumption of things that are already gone. The vulture is the bird nobody wants at the party. It is the bird that appears on the battlefield after the battle, the bird that circles in cartoons above the dying prospector in the desert, the bird whose presence in a landscape is read as a sign that something has ended rather than as a sign that something is actively working. Before it lands on that carcass, I want you to understand what it is about to do, why the doing of it matters to an extent that is almost impossible to overstate, and why the disappearance of vultures from the landscapes where they once operated is producing consequences that are not abstract or ecological in the distant sense, but immediate, measurable, and in some of the regions where it has happened most severely, catastrophic. Today, we are going to follow that vulture down. We are going to look at what it is, what its body has been built to do, what happens at a carcass in the hours and days after a vulture population arrives at it, why the chemistry of what a vulture's digestive system does to the pathogens it ingests is one of the most extraordinary biological processes in the vertebrate world, and why the removal of vultures from a landscape does not simply create a gap in the food chain, but triggers a cascade of consequences for disease, for water quality, for livestock mortality, for human health, and for the economy that researchers who study vulture population collapses describe as one of the most underestimated ecological disasters currently unfolding on Earth. By the end, I think you will understand why conservation biologists who work with Gyps bengalensis and Gyps africanus and the other members of the Old World vulture family consistently argue that no bird on the planet is doing more useful biological work per individual than the one that nobody wants to watch. Let us start with the body, because the body tells the story more honestly than anything else. The vulture's bare head and neck, the feature that most people find either unpleasant or comical, is not an aesthetic accident or an evolutionary oversight. It is the most practical solution to a specific problem that evolution has ever produced. A bird that feeds inside large carcasses by plunging its head and neck deep into the body cavity through the natural openings created by decomposition or by the bird's own powerful beak will emerge from each feeding session with blood, fluid, and decomposing tissue coating any feathers that were present in that region. Feathers retain moisture and organic material. Organic material in a warm enclosed space is an ideal medium for bacterial growth. A feathered head, emerging repeatedly from the interior of a decomposing carcass, would be carrying a sustained inoculation of whatever pathogens were present in that carcass back to the bird's own skin, its eyes, the mucous membranes of its face. The bare skin solution eliminates the problem entirely. There is nothing for the organic material to adhere to beyond the smooth surface itself, and the bare skin of the vulture's head and neck dries rapidly in air and sunlight, killing the surface bacteria that were acquired during feeding.
The feeding posture is the gateway to the specialized digestive system below.
The hooked tip of the vulture's beak is for tearing, specifically for opening the thick hide of large mammal carcasses that have not yet been opened by other means. But the beak's architecture beyond the hooked tip is not the powerful, crushing structure of a bird of prey built for killing. It is a precision instrument for accessing the interior of a carcass through existing openings, for pulling soft tissue from bone, for dismantling the connective structures of a body that has already ceased to resist. The vulture does not kill. It has not been built to kill. Every anatomical feature of its body is oriented toward the efficient, rapid, thorough consumption of something that is already dead. And the efficiency and thoroughness of that consumption is precisely what makes it ecologically irreplaceable. The digestive system is where the vulture's contribution to the world around it becomes genuinely extraordinary. Vultures have evolved a stomach pH of approximately 1, the most acidic gastric environment recorded in any bird and among the most acidic of any vertebrate. At pH 1, the stomach contents are roughly comparable in acidity to battery acid. This extreme acidity is not incidental. It is the mechanism by which the vulture neutralizes what it ingests. Anthrax spores, which can persist in soil for decades and kill large mammals within days of exposure, are destroyed in the vulture's stomach. Botulinum toxin, one of the most lethal naturally occurring substances on Earth, is denatured in transit through the vulture's digestive tract.
We need to check the feedlot water
Cholera, brucellosis, foot and mouth disease.
The sun rises over the fields of rural India, where life has followed the same rhythm for centuries.
Decomposing large mammal tissue are rendered non-viable by the combination of extreme acidity and the specific immune adaptations of the vulture's gastrointestinal system that researchers have only begun to characterize fully in the last decade. The vulture does not just consume the carcass, it sterilizes it. It converts
the African savanna stretches out below, a tapestry of life interrupted by the march of human progress and technology.
Into inert excreta within a digestive timeline that is measured in hours rather than days. Nothing else in the landscape does this. Now here is the part that will matter most to you as someone trying to understand why the loss of vultures is not a conservation problem in the aesthetic sense, in the sense of losing something beautiful or rare, but a public health emergency in the most literal meaning of that phrase. When vulture populations collapse, the carcass does not disappear, it remains. It decomposes slowly, over days and weeks rather than hours, and during that decomposition it remains a viable reservoir for every pathogen it contained, leaching into the soil below it, attracting the alternative scavengers that move in to fill the vacuum left by the absent vultures. Those alternative scavengers are primarily feral dogs and rats. Feral dogs and rats are not equipped with pH 1 stomachs. They do not sterilize what they consume. They consume a portion of the carcass and they carry the rest of the pathogen load away from the site in their own bodies and faces, distributing it across the landscape. Feral dogs and rats are also, by orders of magnitude compared to vultures, more likely to have direct contact with human beings, with human food supplies, and with the water systems that serve human communities. Let that settle for a moment. The vulture's disappearance from a landscape does not simply leave a gap. It creates a pathway for pathogens that the vulture was previously destroying to reach the people living in that landscape through exactly the vectors that are most effective at transmitting disease to humans. The Indian subcontinent provided the most complete and most devastating natural experiment in what happens when vultures disappear. In the 1990s, 3 species of Gyps vulture that had previously been among the most abundant large birds of prey on Earth began dying in catastrophic numbers across India, Pakistan and Nepal. By 2007, populations of Gyps bengalensis, the oriental white-backed vulture, had declined by an estimated 99%. Gyps indicus and Gyps tenuirostris had fallen by similar proportions. The cause was eventually identified as diclofenac, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that had been approved for veterinary use across the subcontinent in the 1990s, and that was widely used to treat livestock. Cattle treated with diclofenac died with the drug still in their tissue. Vultures feeding on those carcasses ingested the diclofenac and developed visceral gout, a condition in which uric acid crystallizes in the internal organs, and died within days of exposure. A drug being used to reduce inflammation in cattle was, through the vulture's feeding behavior, being converted into one of the most effective avian poisons ever deployed across an entire continent. The consequences cascaded immediately. Feral dog populations on the Indian subcontinent increased by an estimated 7 million animals in the decade following the vulture collapse. Rabies cases attributable to feral dog bites increased proportionally. Anthrax outbreaks increased in areas where the vultures had previously been controlling the carcass load. The economic cost of the dog population increase, the livestock predation, the human health costs of rabies treatment, the disease surveillance burden, and the loss of the carcass disposal service that the vultures had been providing without charge across a continent was estimated in a study published in the journal Ecological Economics at $34 billion over the period of the collapse. $34 billion of economic value generated by birds. That nobody in the financial models of the ecosystem services industry had thought to put a number on until they were gone. The African vulture crisis has followed a different mechanism but an identical trajectory. Across sub-Saharan Africa, vulture populations have declined by between 50 and 90% depending on the species, driven primarily by three causes. The first is poisoning, both deliberate, by poachers who poison carcasses to kill vultures, because vultures circling above an illegally killed elephant or rhino are visible from the air and signal the presence of poachers to wildlife authorities, and accidental through the same veterinary drug pathways that destroyed Indian vulture populations. The second is demand for vulture body parts in traditional medicine and belief practices. The third is collision with and electrocution by power lines, which kills vultures at a rate that their slow reproductive biology, with most species producing only one chick per year, cannot absorb. Hooded vultures, white-backed vultures, and lappet-faced vultures are now classified as endangered or critically endangered. The carcass disposal service they provided across the African savanna, the same sterilization function that kept anthrax and other livestock diseases from spreading through the ecosystems where large mammals die, is declining in direct proportion to their numbers. The poaching dynamic creates a particularly brutal feedback loop. The more vultures are killed to prevent them signaling poaching activity, the more effectively anthrax and other diseases spread through the ungulate populations that the poached megafauna would have helped regulate, the more livestock die, the more carcasses accumulate, and the more the feral dog and rat populations that replace the vultures come into contact with both the livestock and the human communities that depend on them. What should you understand about vultures after all of this? Vultures are not waiting for things to die. They are not symbols of death. They are the most efficient disease containment system that vertebrate evolution has ever produced. Their bare heads are hygienic engineering. Their pH 1 stomachs are biological incinerators for some of the most dangerous pathogens in the landscape. Their disappearance from the Indian subcontinent produced a $34 billion hole in the economy, and a 7 million dog increase in the feral population, and a measurable increase in human rabies deaths. Their disappearance from the African savanna is actively assisting the poaching industry that is destroying the same megafauna populations the vulture depends on. They are providing for free, continuously, without any infrastructure, without any operating cost, a carcass disposal and pathogen control service whose value only becomes visible when the bird itself becomes invisible. The vulture is not the bird nobody wants. It is the bird nobody understood. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a conservation problem and a public health catastrophe that is unfolding right now at continental scale. While the bird responsible for preventing it circles overhead and most people look away, have you ever watched a vulture and seen it differently after understanding what it is doing? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and this is exactly the kind of story this community was built for. And if you want to understand another creature that the world is losing and whose absence will reshape the landscape in ways most people have not begun to imagine, the next video is already waiting for you.